It says preparing live stream.
Yeah, I hadn't clicked on the OK either, Christy. So
Oh,
I'm glad you mentioned that. Maybe that was us.
Yeah.
nope, unsupported request does not
Okay.
exist. All
All
right, let's
right.
just go ahead so we can.
Okay.
So Betsy, you can go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome back to a town hall with the 802 United, where we interview fascinating people who are active in Kansas that we have a lot to learn from, and we enjoy this so much, and we hope that you will too. I'm going to begin by describing the mission and vision of the 802 United. We're named for the August 2nd, 2022 vote, hence 802, where Kansans said, no, you may not take away our civil rights and our healthcare choices. So the idea is that the 802 United, we are valuing the people and opportunities that are available in Kansas. We strive to make our state a welcoming environment for all people, utilizing principles that put community and purposeful kindness ahead of ideological extremism. So we're united against extremism, hence the 802 United. So, Julie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Betsy. So tonight we have with us two of the organizers of Kansas 5051, and we're going to take a little bit of an in-depth look at what it is that Kansas 5051 does and what they see in the future. So we have Christy, wave at us, Christy, and we have Jolene, and they are both on their, I guess I would call it their master organizing team. And so why don't you guys tell us what Kansas 5051 is all about?
Well, I
Christy
wanted to
was a
start.
founder, so I'm going to let her go first.
So I wanted to start by first explaining what 5051 is, and then I'll talk about what Kansas 5051 is. So 5051 is a national idea that became a movement. And the original idea was 50 state capitals, 50 protests all on the same day, with the shared goals of ending executive overreach, upholding the Constitution, returning power to the three co-equal branches of government, equality for all, and all of that achieved through nonviolent action. And being nonpartisan in nature. If you believed in those tenets, then you were welcome in the movement. As I said, it sort of started as just an idea. It was really meant originally as a one-day thing. It was an event. And that first event happened in January a year ago. And it was so well received, and the energy around it was just so positive, and really a groundswell of support for that idea, as people felt both seen in their own states and also connected to the other states around the nation. Because of that connection, it got more media than it might have otherwise. And also because it was on the weekend of the inauguration, I think it also got a lot of, sort of groundswell of support. So because of that groundswell, it really became a movement. It continues to be more of a movement than an organization. A lot of people don't understand really how decentralized it is. It's really just a bunch of individual groups in different states that kind of come together and do the same things or similar things in similar days. The first action, like I said, was in January. And that happened to coincide with a protest that was already planned by the Topeka Women's March group. And so they're the ones who actually did the event on that day. So there wasn't a Kansas 5051 on that original day. It was the Topeka Women's March group. And I don't think many people realize that. I certainly didn't. I was just an attendee at that event. And then when I started seeing on social media calls for the next events, which were early February, and then President's Day. And as President's Day was coming closer, and I was like, I'm not hearing of a Kansas event. And I kept kind of throwing that out into the social media world. Who's planning something? How do we know what's going on? And nobody was answering.
It's you.
So for the first time, and so I contacted Topeka Women's March, and they said, oh no, that was our event, and we do these other things, but we're not planning another rally. And so I just called the Capitol first to find out who was I really thought I was calling to find out who was doing it. And they said, nobody has a permit. And I said, oh, how does that happen? And, found out that it really wasn't that complicated. It was something I could handle, and I wanted to get it reserved. So I went ahead and reserved it. And kind of simultaneously, as I announced that out onto some social media pages, another woman, Summer, was putting up a flyer, and then there was actually another flyer. So for a little while there was one at 2 different times. And so really Kansas 5051 started as 2 or 3 people who all met online, who were all doing their own little thing, and we found each other, came together, and on the February 17th President's Day was the first day we had met each other. We just showed up at the time and place at the Capitol, and one person brought a bullhorn, and there was not a lot to it other than show up at this time and place. And I stood up not actually on the steps at all, but on like the lamp post out front, or the flag post out front, and we just handed the megaphone around, and people chanted, and it was a very fulfilling event, I would say. I really walked away with feeling a lot more positive than I had felt in the weeks prior. So I know
I kind of that it was so organic that I get tired of having people say, okay, the organized wine moms, hello.
Right.
Yes, we do a red wine and blue thing in Kansas as well. Right. But this idea that somehow we had to be told what to do instead of gravitating toward, we've got something to say and we're here to say it, and you can just sit back and listen. I think that's the best thing about it.
Yeah. And from the beginning, the message was, we are the ones who have to do something. There's nobody else coming to do it for us. Yeah.
So Christy ended up involved in the Kansas 5051, pretty much like I ended up in the 802 United. I went to a meeting I shouldn't have gone to, but 3 years later, here I am. So Jolene, how did you get involved in the movement? Oh, you're
muted.
My dog was barking, so I muted myself. I'm a longtime organizer and involved in the community kind of person. So I had, in terms of the election in 2024, I'd been very involved with the women's rights group, which also happened organically. It wasn't there one day and Kamala announced, and like a week later there was this group, and a month later there was 2,000 or 3,000 women in it, people in it. So it was very organic, and we had several events and protests then and actions, and that was uplifting. And so I was involved in that and seeing their protests, and I knew I wanted to do something. To this day, I don't remember which of the protests I attended before I joined 5051. I know I went to several at the State House. Whose they were, I'm not quite sure. It really wasn't, the point was never, we are the people doing this, you have to follow us. The point was, we are here with a message and you have a right to speak. And so that's always been the message. So I do remember the day I met Christy, though, because I went to the Hands Off March on April 5th, and I knew that was going to be well received because I kept seeing it over and over, and I decided to volunteer. I think I was the volunteer song leader and something else that day. And before I went early and I went inside the Capitol building. I used to work in the Capitol building, both for the Democratic staff on the House side and then as a lobbyist for a number of years. And so I went in the Capitol building to go to the bathroom, and I happened to see my state rep in there, and we had a little conversation. When I came out 15 minutes later, instead of the hundreds of people that were there when I went in, there were thousands. And it was like, oh, this is something different. That was the second time that last year I felt that way. The first time was when I took part in a mock town hall, a virtual town hall with Jerry Moran, that one of my friends here in town put together, and had tried diligently to get him to let us do a video town hall or something, and he said no. And when I realized there were 1,200 people watching us live on YouTube, and there were about 12,000 that watched it in the week after on YouTube, I realized there was something changing in Kansas, and I wanted to be part of it.
That's
have,
awesome.
I have goosebumps hearing that.
Yeah, felt different than the past.
I read today that Senator Moran was actually answering his own phone.
Yes, I saw that, and I made the mistake of thinking that meant he was picking up the phone. It just meant staff in his office was answering the phone instead of letting it go to voicemail.
That's what I was thinking too. Well, now I'm disappointed. So as far as the 50-51 movement is concerned, I think I understand that other states have 50-51 groups. What about, are there 50-51 groups in communities in Kansas, or is it just the Kansas 50-51?
So every state is different how that happens, and a lot of states have multiple 50-51s, especially if they have multiple large city centers. But I don't know why exactly. I'll tell you what I think. As far as Kansas, really, we are with the Topeka capital being the focus. That's not to say that we're all from Topeka. A lot of people think that. I only go to Topeka for protests. But really, it's only been the Kansas 50-51 / Topeka capital that has formed, except there is a KC 50-51. And they certainly can cover Kansas's side as well, but they have tended to be focused more on the Missouri side. I said I would tell you why. I mean, because like easily Wichita one could have crept up, or Salina or Hutch or something. But what's happened is there were either already existing pretty well developed or well organized, motivated organizations there, such as, I mean, you mentioned Red, Wine, and Blue, or Indivisible, or or outside of the 50-51 idea, other local organic organizations cropped up, like Leading Kansas is in Wichita, and Central Kansas Activists is in Salina. So, and we just started reaching out and working with them fairly early on. And so I think there hasn't been a sort of a need for 50-51 to have its own, why start another thing when there's already something there? That's my take on it. Do you have a different one, Jolene, or something to add?
No, I mean, I agree with everything you just said, but I would say that over the months of 2025, we have seen occasions where a local group might say, Newton 50-51 or Gardner 50-51, and we're like, what? But really, we haven't encouraged that because we're struggling to keep up with everything we're trying to do, and we really can't. At this point, we don't have the bandwidth to be supportive of local chapters or whatever that would entail. Although we do want to, through other ways, be supportive of all local organizations that are part of, quote unquote, the resistance. I think that's when it does creep up, I think it's a action of courage on the local person's part because they want to act and they want some sanction and some public approval. And so I understand why they do that. And you just want to reward them. And that really hasn't lasted because all those groups where that's come forward at any point in time, I think has turned into their own little identity of their own. Wouldn't you say, Christy? I mean, the Garden
Yeah,
group
and
certainly did. The Newton group certainly did.
right, yeah, yeah. I mean, so what I found more than it's more that they are calling it that event, and it's because it coincides with an event day, right? That is national, and they're saying, well, we can't travel to the capital, but I want to have something here. And I'll be honest, initially, I was really bought in to the capital being so important, just because it's what drew me in, right? It was the idea of 50 protests at 50 capitals all on the same day, and so that really made me feel empowered and important and magnified. And so initially, I was really kind of trying to coordinate with other organizations in other cities to like maybe have their protest earlier or later and bring people to the Capitol. And I still feel that way to some extent. But as time has gone on, I've learned the value of all of the protests. And so I was actually thinking about how we measure success, which I know is one of the things you all were going to ask. And I was, initially we had, I think, as one of our mission statements, Jolene, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had in one of the initial configurations of that, it was like an ever growing activism audience at the Capitol events, right? And then we were like, wait a minute, maybe it's more an ever growing audience, and that could be at the Capitol, but it could also be us uplifting protests everywhere and interconnecting them, even if we're not there physically together.
Right.
There's other ways for us to connect that.
Right. And I think that when that came into focus with me was after the first No Kings event in June. And I, by then, had been going to Congressman Schmidt's office on a regular basis every week with a group trying to communicate our message. And it felt to me like they didn't care what was happening if they could dismiss it as being Lawrence liberals or just crazy people in Topeka or whatever. I mean, I love sitting there and reading the names of the cities that had it. My favorite one, I don't know why, is Hiawatha. Where every time I can tell them what's happening in Hiawatha, I think they have, and Independence, which is where Congressman Schmidt is from. And so I took great pride in telling them the numbers in June were 34,000 in 21 Kansas cities. But in October, we had 48,000, and that's a conservative estimate because we're only counting half of the plaza. We never know how many Kansans versus Missourians are in the plaza. But and 42 cities plus the KCMO plaza. And so you have to be proud of that. I don't know where else 48,000 Kansans have gathered together with a unified voice for their elected officials. I just think that's a very powerful thing. And so I tend to, when we go to Schmidt's office, I break it down for Schmidt's district and tell them what's there, and I just think they have to care about that more. They show no evidence that they care about that more, but that's a different Zoom and a different conversation.
So 48,000 Kansans on the same day protested.
Including 22 at a nursing home in Lawrence.
That is amazing. Good work, ladies. Good work.
Yeah.
So,
and that was a coalition of people all across the state.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And as a result, actually, of some of those kinds of ideas, one of the things that we've now started doing is a weekly Kansas crowd count. So as much as possible, yes, thank you for sending me your numbers. So if anybody's listening to this and they don't know it, if you go to the email KS50501 counts at pm.me, that, and or find us any other way. I mean, I also look through the Facebook feeds and messages and stuff like that. But we get a crowd count for every protest in Kansas every week. And track that and then put it out on social media. And there's a couple of reasons. I mean, sometimes people have questioned, is there value in that? I had so many goals when we talked about it. One is to actually have weekly connections with the small towns that are doing things, so that like we have another avenue of communication, right? If we're talking every week over text, then if there's something that requires our attention in Kansas, it's easier maybe to get the message out the other direction. But then also, I mean, there's a little competitive nature in all of us, I think, and maybe some don't feel this way, but every once in a while I look at like that Eudora number or whatever, and they're a 30-40 minute drive for me, but I'm like, I think I could head out there today, because last week they were down to 10 and other times they've been at 20, and I know it feels way better at 20 than it does at 10, so yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. And then it's just historical information as well. I mean, it's hard to tell exactly, because of course weather and events and holidays and all of that are going, and football games and things like that are going to play a factor. So it's not, you can't look week by week, apples to apples. But I can tell you that we started doing this right after the October No Kings event. And in November, the crowd counts I was getting were in the 900s. And then in December, of course, it went down like into the 500 to 600s, right? But let me tell you, as we all know, this year started off with the kind of bang politically that we didn't want to have happen. And the first week in January, we had 3,177 people. And that's the week that Renee Good was shot. And then this week, even without that, we've had 1,559. And of course, that doesn't include everybody, because I always say there's at least one, if not 5 protests that maybe don't know to get the numbers into me or whatever. But again, if you're watching this, even if you are a solo person and you just go stand out on the street corner, because we have somebody in Kansas, if folks aren't aware of it, who does that every single day. I think they're on day 260 or
Yeah,
something.
260 something, yeah.
That they've gone out every day somewhere and stood, even if it's they by themselves, and held a sign up. And I make sure to include those as well. And I think some of the small town ones are most impressive. I know, in Oskaloosa, we had one where I think 5-6 of us showed up or something, but that was our only protest to date. But it takes some guts to do that in your small town. So, I think those are super important.
I loved from the October reports, I love the guy in Hiawatha who told me, he said, look, we had 33 people on our side, but there was this one guy who was trying to convince us we were wrong. And we talked to him a long time, and it felt like he changed halfway. So we want to count him too. And I thought that was good. And then one of our towns was the Lindsberg Swedish parade. Roger Marshall was in the parade in an open car, and there were about 15 people who just flat out booed him the whole time. And we counted them too. So, because you talk about courage, that's pretty courageous.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's easy for me. I'm in Overland Park. a blue dot in Johnson County, that's easy. But if I lived in small red town Kansas, that takes a lot of chutzpah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So you guys are heavily involved in the planning and the execution of the Kansas 5051 activities. How do you protect your mental health being so heavily involved? Because I know that just from my work as in my real life, it can wear on you.
Jolene, do you want to go first or should I?
Well, I'll start. In December, I watched a lot of Hallmark Christmas movies in between work. I'd like work on the computer for several hours and then I'd do a movie or two just to kind of let my brain fall out. But really, the most important thing I do every week is I'm in my 70s, but I have a friend who's 11 in fifth grade, and she's my buddy. She used to live next door to me, and we spend every Friday evening together and sometimes more time on the weekends. And that grounds me in a way nothing else can. And sometimes she asks me why I spend so much time working on the protests. Now, she's been to almost every one of them, and I say, for you, it's for you, because I want you to have the quality of life I've had or better. And she understands that now. So that protects my mental health because I understand why I'm doing it.
That's
And
cool.
frankly, the people I've met, I mean, we may have disagreements from time to time, but the golden hearts of the people that give up their lives to do this, any portion of their lives, it's just been amazing and impressive. Christy included.
Yeah. And back at you for sure.
health.
Yeah, so I mean, I was thinking about this question, and the number one thing I think I'm gonna say, being really honest, is that I'm not always okay. And so that has actually become okay. It's okay to not be okay. And I've kind of I've been doing it enough now that I've identified some rhythms. And so, for instance, I go to these events and I feel pumped up and alive, and we've worked really hard to get there. And invariably, the next 2 days, maybe 3 days, I'm going to think, why did I just do all that? That doesn't last forever, thank goodness, but it just comes. And so I've talked with enough other activists now about this, and that's the other thing is being willing to be honest and talk with other people who might be in similar situations as you and not pretend to be okay. I have found a few people that I can talk one-on-one with who, they're just right there with me, and we can say all the things about wanting to quit and not thinking and what we're doing isn't making a difference and all of those things, and we can listen and acknowledge, but know that we're going to get back up and do something. From the beginning, I had a mantra, because so before even Kansas 5051, like after the election, right, I fell into depression. I mean, that it was not okay. And I felt so overwhelmed. And I think it's really easy to feel so overwhelmed. And what I decided one day is I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. And I decided that I could do one thing a day, that I would try to commit to doing, calling one of the 5 or sharing, not just a meme, but like an article about something. I was really leaned into education at that point. I was like, okay, I can watch one person's podcast or whatever and share one person's bit of information that people might not know if they're not following the news, because so many people aren't following the news, right? So the do one thing, it really was a mantra. And the irony in that is that, like, I made that my title in my socials media accounts and stuff, and it's like all of a sudden come February I was doing way more than one thing a day, and it's
What I was
kind of
thinking.
become part of my life. But I wanted to add to that, when I am most like down, it's easy to want to quit, right? And I was just listening to a podcast that was on part of an NPR thing. And there's a sociologist out of UNC, University of North Carolina, who's a New York Times columnist, Tressie McMillan Cottom. And she has, the studies have found that it's when you pull back, um, if you're already down or depressed and you pull back more and you don't do, your mood is much more likely to continue on a downward trend than if you're feeling that way and you lean in and you do actually more, or at least continue, that your mood is much more likely to go up. So I just try to remind myself of that.
That's a
I
good point.
I think another thing for me, I'm blessed to live in a really uh, active neighborhood, and we know each other and we talk. And I've been the MC at the last three protests at the Capitol building, and I've relied a lot on people in my neighborhood and people, friends in Topeka, to fill in for jobs we need at the last minute, whether it's holding good trouble signs or whatever. And it's been really, I've learned a great deal from that, because I've realized you can try and script an event in every detail so that you know exactly what's going to happen. Or you can leave some room for magic to happen and to be available and open. And what I've discovered is that um, really has benefits, being open to the magic. And what I've been able to experience after our events is a lot of ongoing feedback from people I know in the community. Some of them saying, "Oh, let's go have coffee and talk about what happened," or whatever. And or neighbors that come by with dramatic ideas. I had somebody come by after the October one and go, "Look, I want you to know I used to do this job and I know 100 volunteers in this town if you need volunteers." And I'm like, okay, writing that one down, you know. And then I had a couple young women that live very close to me come by and give me their ideas. And one of them has just joined our 5051 team. So, you know, that being able to stay connected, I think, is the message that we hear from national organizations, which is when you do something, you will feel better. When you realize you are not alone, you will feel better. And I think that's the big advantage of the collective protests coming together. And I think it's probably magnified in the smaller communities even more than in the larger ones. Um, and after the August event, it was a really powerful day. I was in sync with the audience and they were in sync with me. And we had a volunteer that had 3D printed 200 horns that are, oh, here, I have a horn. I can show you these horns, and they're loud. And so we had people using that to respond, and we were doing call and response. And it was cathartic. And we were on target. And after I got through the agenda of what everything we wanted to talk about, um, we did a moment of silence for Gaza. And as I tend to do when something hits me unusually emotionally, I kind of choked up. But we got through it. We did our moment of silence and went on. But right then, there was the starvation in Gaza was pretty dramatic, and it affected me and others on the team that wanted to do the moment of silence. Later that week, I was in Lawrence for the proposal or the educational forum on the Supreme Court amendment. And these women who were sitting behind me after it was over, I was waiting to talk to somebody about working on the amendment. And they were whispering among themselves, and I realized they were talking about me. And I said, well, and they said, were you the one at the mic, Sarah? And I said, yes. And they said, it was just great. It was wonderful. You were wonderful. I said, no, you guys were wonderful. You were giving me all the emotion and I was feeding it back. And, you know, and the woman on the end came over and grabbed my arm and she said, no. And I'm not saying this to be boastful. I'm saying it because there's a lesson to be learned here. She said, no, it was you, because you choked up when you talked about the moment of silence for Gaza, and it made you real. And I thought, wow, isn't that the message of the year? That people just want something real to believe in, something tangible that they can trust. Because it seems like a lot of that has been stolen away from us. So I try to keep that in mind.
That's pretty powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you another question here. Every time I see an advertisement for one of your events, it very explicitly says it is a peaceful protest. How do you ensure, because they have all been peaceful that I've been to, how do you guys ensure that that actually happens? Because I can see how some mischievous people could really mess that up.
Christy, you want to take that one?
I'll try. Yeah. I mean, so number one, as you've said, I mean, we try to make it just explicit from the get-go. We try to say it on the flyers and in the event, information, and then again, when people come from the mic, I know I did when I was on there, and I believe Jolene's continued that practice. We start by reminding the audience what we're there for, and that nonviolence is a core principle, and a really important part. We do have. We didn't initially, right? Initially, it was just me standing on a concrete block with a bullhorn, but we have learned quickly what it takes to organize when there's hundreds or thousands of people who show up instead of just 50. And so because of that, the national organizations have put out all kinds of trainings that we've been able to partake in. So we've learned quickly. And so we do have like safety teams set up. So we have people who are observers, and their only job is to watch their slice of the crowd. We have people then who are advocates. Other organizations sometimes call them marshals, who, if there is a problem identified, either by the observers or by themselves or by anybody in the crowd, can move over and try to de-escalate the situation. One of the key things we try to get the audience to understand, either to the whole audience or one-on-one, our advocates will explain to somebody, is if there are counter protesters, we are not there to give them energy. So anybody who has shown up to a protest to counter protest is there for one reason only, and that is to take the attention away. I mean, if I went to counter protest somewhere, my goal is not that I'm a bad, horrible person, but my goal would be to distract from the original protest, right? So we let people win when we let counter protesters win when we give them energy. So it's so tempting to, comment back at the car that's revving its engine by, or if there's somebody in the crowd or any of that. But our whole message is just over and over again, focus away, let them do their thing, and just stay positive. We've had a chant that we sometimes practice from the podium. We are for democracy. So it's keeping things positive and just trying not to give energy in that direction.
And Christy did a good job of explaining the organizational strategies. I do think we really, at the Topeka events, have not really been tested in the way some of the local groups have. Wichita's had some encounters. I know Kansas City's had some encounters. And that when you're tested is when you find out whether or not what you've practiced enough. Because really, it's all about instinct and training your instinct to not react, because that's the instinct. I think it's even harder in the cities that have been occupied by ICE, and because the escalation has not been happening by individuals, it's been happening by authority figures. And I don't know how any of us, no matter how much we've been trained, would react if ICE was putting pepper spray in our car vents to get us to come out of the car, or in our blow up frog suits, which happens in several places. I mean, when they are being extremely violent, I think is going to be the real test of that, and it's really hard. I know one of my favorite stories is the Portland Frog had an ICE. It was the first time we heard about ICE taking their pepper spray and going to the vent on the blow up suit and spraying it directly in there. And when he was asked later by a newspaper how he felt about that, and he goes, I'm Hispanic. I've tasted spicier.
Keep
And
it moving.
and I just want to say that trying to be joyfully defiant is a strategy that I use for my mental health and well-being. And I was inspired by my state rep, who's a minister. Before the October 18th thing, he had "Be Joyfully Defiant" on his billboard outside the church. I saw it for 3 weeks, and I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to do that. And so we did. We were very joyfully defiant that day.
I'm
So
so glad, Jolene, that you said that, because I agree. We've had small things, right? We've had small instances, but yeah, I know that I don't want anybody listening to think that these groups that have, struggled with something harder, they're really, I think honestly, one of the things is at the Capitol, we're a bit insulated. That doesn't mean something can't, but we're not on the street, right? We're on the Capitol steps or a little further. So passerbyers have a harder time connecting in a negative way unless they're willing to get out of their car and come be really part of our crowd.
Yeah, we had somebody walk up after it was basically over last time at the beginning. But I will say, you ask about law enforcement coordination in your list of questions. That's one thing that I think has been beneficial to us, although there are some national organizations that are critical of working with law enforcement. Here in Kansas, and particularly in Topeka, I can't speak for any other city, the police department is not involved in a 287G coordination agreement with ICE, and they have been most helpful. And in many ways, but in my conversations with them before the events, they have shared with me things they've heard and things they've tested out and don't think are really a threat to be worried about, or we've had a couple of conversations about that stuff in advance, so we kind of know where everybody's coming from. The other thing I think is good with them is they don't make themselves visible at the Capitol. The Capitol Police is visible because it's their jurisdiction on the Capitol grounds, but the Topeka Police are not. They're available, they're monitoring, but they're not walking in the crowd making people feel odd.
I do want to add, though, we don't provide them with more information than we feel they need. Like we are respectful, and we get the permit from the Capitol Police, um, and we communicate with the Capitol Police about, like, where we're going to be, and then we'd say if we're going to go downtown, and if we're going to go downtown, then the Capitol Police let the city police know, and it's only if the city police have, so I think it's a fine line, right? Because we are cognizant that the day may come where we're on opposite sides of something. So yeah, it's a fine line.
I think, we're coming from different perspectives, but one thing that one of our the lawyers that's been advising through me this year suggested from the beginning is maybe making that contact and acknowledging that we are part of a community. We are all part of a community here, for those of us who live in Topeka in particular, and that bond can be stronger than anything that divides us. And I think in some respects that's been helpful. I mean, there have been some newspaper stories in advance of events that there were some comments that were worrisome. And those are the kinds of things that I tend to talk through and see if they think there's anything to worry about from that or not. So that,
Like there's a story produced online and then you get the comment section, you mean?
yeah, the
Yeah.
comments, because people can be really boastful there, and it's hard to read. Is that a serious thing we need to take into consideration, or is that probably not going to amount to anything?
You guys are in pretty constant contact with both the Capitol Police and the Topeka Police Department.
I would say with the
not constant, but around events.
Okay.
I would say with the Capitol Police in particular, because that's where the permit is, and then somewhat with the city police. If we're going to be marching downtown, that's the only time that we're in touch with them, is if we're going to be on the city streets.
Or they might reach out to you if they have a question. Is that
correct? So because my understanding is the Capitol Police communicate to them, and so they know we're doing it, right? But it's like Capitol Police are the focus.
Okay. When you look at your overall body of work with these protests, what are the components that you're looking at that indicate you've been successful in achieving your goals?
So, one of the things is that I know another sort of way of asking that would be like sort of what are the goals, right, of the protests. And I really see it a little bit, I was thinking like as a spider's web, right? And like the big protests are like the center of the spider's web, but like that's not it can't just float out there by itself. It's really about making connections. So when people come, they make connections and feel seen, and their mental health is better and things like that. But also they literally make connections with other groups and other events and other things that are going to be happening. We use it as an educational piece. So what matters is, or when I think about the things that that matter that we've done, it's as a result of the initial core protest. Then there's other offshooting things, like we've had tables to educate voters about the amendments. And those aren't the big protests, but they happened as a result of brainstorming because of the big protests. Or people showing up at the core civic meetings. Leavenworth was going to do that, but like because of our reach as an organization, because of the big protests, then when we announce an action like that, we can get 100 people over there with just a couple days notice, whereas they might not have been able to do that without the reach of a larger organization. So I just kind of see us as the starting point, or not even us, the big protests as a starting point, and then both within Kansas 5051 we have other things we do, but also organically other groups have grown out of it. Jolene?
I'm not even sure what I want to say about that, except that I think the Christy and I both want more people to come to protests. And it took us a long time to figure out that she was focused, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Christy, she was focused more on people that are already on social media and getting them to turn out to protest. And I was focused more on people who are not on social media and getting them to turn out to protest. And those require very different strategies. So we were having some conflicting agendas there that we had to work out. And I still think there's that validity for both. But I ran a little test a week ago when we had the protests after the Renee Good killing, that I thought, okay, this is going to happen in 2 days. So I can't rely on people to wait till the weekend to be scrolling through Facebook. And it's not clear to me anymore who sees my Facebook and who doesn't it, because clearly the algorithms are being messed with and they're trying to minimize our reach. And so I just started texting people in my phone, and I ended up texting 85 or 86 people. And when we went to the event, I counted at least 16 that came from my texts. And I don't think I could get, I have almost 2,000 Facebook members or friends, but I don't think I could get that percentage of turnout from Facebook. And that's probably more my crowd, although they're by far not all my age. Um, so I think there's a lot of that that's still undiscovered. Um, and that's why I'm trying to make as many personal contacts and stay connected to people in my community as possible.
One of the things that I've been really excited to see and has given me a little boost of energy in the last few days is that the high schools came out. And my daughter actually a year ago had been learning about sort of the civil rights era, and she learned details that I never learned in school, and she was sharing with me. And there was really a time where, and now I'm going to get choked up and say, I mean, it resulted in the death of children, right? Or in the hurting of children. But it was when the children said, we're not doing this. This isn't okay. And it's when they showed up that people started taking it really seriously. And I hate to say, but when you've got an example of a 5-year-old being taken by ICE and used to entrap, their loved ones, it's just we need everybody to stand up. So I do agree, Jolene, 100% with this idea that it's time for us to reach out more than social media and look at our phone list and start contacting people and having the uncomfortable conversations that maybe we haven't been. We need everybody to show up now. And I'm really excited the high schools are doing that. I want to keep them as safe as possible while that happens. But maybe there's a turning of the crowd a little bit.
That would be good, because when I go, I see, Betsy said it already, us old white women that are there, and it's going to take more than that. And Chrissy, I don't consider you to be old, so you're an anomaly. So if someone's watching right now and you've inspired them, and you guys have inspired me, what could they do? What would be the most helpful way that they could support Kansas 5051?
So it really depends what kind of energy they have to give. I will be honest and say that this is hard work. It's time consuming work, and it's emotional work. And so we have had as many people join and then have to leave our team as are on it. And there's about, I don't know, would you say, it's always hard to tell because of that, but we have maybe 10 to 15 coordinators on our team, and it's a linear, people say that, but we're all coordinators, we all have our own job, and then we get together. If there are people who have, even for 4 to 6 months, the energy to put in about 1 hour a day looking at signal chats and a couple hours a week, so we meet on Sundays at 6 p.m. On Zoom calls for an hour or two. And then as the events get closer, it maybe takes a little more time to do your job. But it really depends on the job. But if somebody had that kind of energy, even if you don't want to sign up to do it forever, we could really use more people on our coordinator team. We're at a bit of a dip energy wise, and we need some new energy in. However, we also have special projects and things that are like one-off projects that we need people to do, or there's this idea as the amendments come up where we want to have traveling tables where on the weekend you would go out and maybe just for an hour or two sit in an area and hand out information about the amendments. There's things like being a flyer printer. I call it a flyer brigade, and just in your own small town, maybe you get our flyers and we send them to you electronically, you print them, and you know your town best, so you go to the places where they're not going to get torn down right away, right? You go put it in your library, your coffee shop, or your bookstore, or whatever. Um, there's all kinds of little projects like that. So if you have, and then there's when we have events, we always need volunteers the day of, and that tends to be really just during the event that you would be getting a couple hours of your time, or if you're on the safety team, it's like the whole event. So we call it 3 levels of participation: day of, special projects, or joining our coordinator team, and we need all of the above. So reach out to us and say I'm interested, and then we can have a one-on-one conversation about where you would fit in best.
And I would add to that if I had a couple conversations with friends in Wichita over the holiday, one of whom is homebound because of a physical illness, but still wants to be involved. And I'm putting together kind of a list of possible support for them. And I think fostering the culture of saying no more, enough, stop, defend democracy, Constitution is important. I carry a Constitution with me everywhere I go, and I tend to pull it out at opportune times just so people look at it and ask me what that's about. But just talking
she's got one there.
Yeah,
I have 50 of them. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I will mail it to you.
That's good. I mean, just talking about it and making your opinion known to people in your life will foster more conversation and more discussion and make it more acceptable to be saying no. Because I'm a firm believer that we have a short window here to save our democracy, and we really need to up the conversation and the message. And I don't know how we get our elected officials who are intentionally not listening to us to be more scared of us than they are of their reelection. But we got to work on it, and we don't have much time.
I would agree. So with all that heaviness, what is it that gives you hope right now?
I mean, that's where I really got hopeful when I saw those high schoolers walk out. When I see new people or new efforts, the other thing that is giving me hope is that unfortunately, because of the things going on in Minnesota and elsewhere, I'm seeing people in the neighborhoods around me really starting to reach out to each other and get organized. So, just in the last week, there's a group of neighbors in an area where I live that are reaching out and saying, what are we going to do if it's on our doorstep? And we want to at least know each other. And so, yeah, it's when I see people reaching out and new people stepping forward that I get hopeful.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I had somebody yesterday or the day before asked me for a bunch of information about being responsive to ICE and aware of it and how to coordinate all that. And that person is in a position of power within a system that can make a big difference. And I was very glad to provide that with her. I'm glad that people know they can come to me for that kind of resource, and I'm happy to help them. And I have to say, I had another choking up moment the other day when we were at the Capitol, and 670 people in the Kansas Capitol were singing This Little Light of Mine, which is a song I've always loved. And I choke up now thinking about it. I thought, these little lights can go do a lot of good work.
Yeah.
And that's what it's going to take. And I would like to thank you two for all of the work that you've done with your little lights, because I've been to most of the 5051 events, unless I've been out of town or something. And I have always been extremely impressed with how that has come off, whether it was intentional or it was organic. Whatever it is that you're doing, it's working. So I forgot to ask if someone wants to get in contact with you because they want to help, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can do it through any of our social media things, and it will get back to we're small enough that it's probably going to get back. But if you, so I have had occasionally somebody say nobody responded to me. Our website for sure, which is help me out. Is it Kansas or KS?
I think it's KS, but let me go check.
KS. We'll check right now. That the website has a contact me thing, and then our email is 50501 underscore ks@proton.me. That comes direct to me. I'm the volunteer coordinator. It's also available on our website, and that is
KS50501.com.
yeah,
Excellent.
that's what I thought. So thank you.
Ladies, I very much appreciate your time tonight. And I actually am walking away a little bit more hopeful after
Good.
listening to you and your passion and some of the things that you've observed. So thank you for that. And
Well,
I
I
think
wanted to throw a thank you right back at you both because you both are people who inspire me. And the last thing that I guess I want to say that does keep me going and inspires me is just people continuing to be able to smile at each other. Even when we don't feel like smiling, we can at least give each other a smile of "I'm with you," and that it's that connection that matters most.
awesome. Betsy, do
Amen.
you have any closing thoughts?
I my heart is lighter tonight having been with you guys. And
Aw.
I do find, we were talking about what do you do when you're feeling down? Taking action. That's my energizer. And just feeling like I know now more people that I can give my energy to, and I'm going to get energized by that. And so that's been a wonderful, wonderful outcome tonight. And I'm so grateful.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
invitation and thanks for all you do.
Yep.
We will talk with you later.
Okay.
All of you out there in Facebook land, have a good evening, and
Good
tune in
night.
to see what our February event will be. See you later.
Bye.